Now let me introduce our speaker. To say that we're fortunate to have Dr. Samuel is an understatement. I really don't think there's anyone else in the country who has worked as much as Anna has on explaining these topics in a way that is positive, that avoids polemics, and is also accessible to the average layman and woman, but is also respected by academics. And Dr. Samuel certainly has a compelling academic resume. She did her undergraduate in the politics department of Princeton University, and then she received her Ph.D. from the University of Notre Dame, where she focused on political theory and sexual ethics. Dr. Samuel has helped lead studies on family structure. She's co-authored academic papers. And then 7 years ago, she started a reading group with her friends to address these issues. And it was so helpful that it spawned other reading groups, and that actually turned into CanaVox. And CanaVox is an organization that promotes reading groups for men and women to better understand the topics that we're addressing tonight. And today, CanaVox is a full nonprofit with many groups all over the world. And Anna is both the academic director of CanaVox as well as a research scholar at the Witherspoon Institute in Princeton. But not only that, she and her husband are the proud, happy, and as she says, winded parents of 6 children, ages 5 to 15. So she's right there where all of us are with the ages of our children. Dr. Samuel's time is clearly precious and clearly very limited, and we are truly fortunate to have her. It's a real honor, and Anna, we're very grateful to you and April for making the time to come be with us. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Anna Samuel.
Thank you for such a warm welcome. April and I are really so touched. I mean, half the time I'm expecting tomatoes to be coming at me when I'm speaking. So to have so many nice, warm people welcome us is really enriching for the both of us. So when your fearless headmaster asked me to come speak, I was sort of expecting the usual, come talk to us about how to talk to our kids about sex, pornography, but when he said you all really wanted to learn how to talk about homosexuality, transgender issues, sexual identity with your kids, I thought, okay, they want to talk about the thorniest sexual issues of our time, which tells me a couple of things about you all. First, it tells me that Northridge is not afraid to run right into a challenge. It really says a lot about your school. And it also tells me that I'm probably talking to an above-average parent audience. I'm going to assume that you all already know how to talk to your kids about sex, you have down pat why waiting for marriage is great, you know all the basics, and you really do want the higher level classes on how to talk to our kids about these really novel things. So if this really were a university class, it's not the 100 or the 200 level class you're interested in, but the 300 level and the 400 level class. So that's what I've crafted tonight. I've crafted the higher level seminar. But if you want to brush up on the 100 and 200 level stuff or pick up some tips, you're in luck. We brought our new 2nd edition booklet on how to talk to your kids about sex. So this covers the basics, so I hope you'll pick up a copy and pick up some new pointers. But tonight I am going to focus on the more difficult topics. So I'm going to proceed with case studies. I'm going to be looking at different scenarios that pop up in family life, starting from elementary school and then working up through middle school and high school. And think about possible ways that you could address these issues with kids of all different ages. But as I was looking through all the scenarios, I just realized that there were some common principles that apply to all the conversations. You could call them 4 different pedagogical principles. So I want to start with those preliminaries. The first principle is to speak the natural law to your kids. I want to assure you that the natural law argument is the right one. It's the strongest fortress you can build in your child's mind. The argument's grounded in biology and the natural design of their bodies. A lot of great families communicate moral teachings based on religious formation, Genesis, the Catechism, and all of that is great, but they really need to be fortified with natural law, their ABCs of the natural law. And also, we found that as kids get older, there may come a time when they themselves experience doubts about their faith. It's really common in the college years that they temporarily shed their faith so that they can later reclaim it as their own. So knowing the natural law arguments really fortifies them in that vulnerable time of life. So it's not that you neglect their religious formation, but it's that you supplement with natural law formation. The second pedagogical principle is to really become excellent at speaking intimately with your kids. And the ideal is to practice conversational intimacy with your kids from a really young age. One of the reasons that parents have such a hard time talking to their kids about sex in general is because when we talk about sex, we're talking about such a deeply intimate subject to begin with. There's this sense of extreme vulnerability for you and them during these conversations. So you have to have already really built up a lot of trust and intimacy with your child for it to even feel natural to broach topics like what is appropriate to do with our bodies. And the thing is, many parents don't have that kind of intimacy with their kids. It's never too late to start. You can always start no matter how late, but the ideal is to begin from an early age. And how do you build intimacy with intimate communication? It's about having frequent one-on-one conversations with them about what's on their heart and in their mind and in a private setting. So just ask them, what's worrying you? Why are you so happy today? What did you think about the birthday party? Really anything is game. Friend issues, academic difficulties, athletic topics, issues with family members. It's sort of like you want to become their personal life coach. And that takes a lot of practice listening to them and setting aside the time. In my household, my younger kids began to label our little talks talkie talks. They derived it from the walkie-talkie idea because with our talkie talks, we were having this private one-on-one conversation with mom and dad. And they started using it as a code word. So one of my kids would get home from school and just say, oh, I really need to have a talkie talk. And that was the code word for like stop snack, go upstairs, cuddle, lock the door so your snotty brothers and sisters aren't gonna interrupt. And they get this private audience with mom or dad, and it makes them feel so special. And sometimes the talkie talk is about a subject that you as the parent might not consider that important. My 5-year-old recently was like, I really need to have a talkie talk. And I was like, okay, let's go. So we went to my bedroom and we locked the door and I sat down and she said, Mom, can you please stop making so much chicken? I was like, it's like, okay, why? She's like, can you just make some steak every once in a while, you know? It's like, okay. And in my mind, I'm thinking, why are we having a talkie talk about this, you know? But for her, that was what was important for her in that moment. So you really have to communicate to them that their thoughts and their ideas are important to you and you're gonna make the time to listen. And as they grow, you set up this really great experience of communication with their child. So as they get older, the talks are naturally going to become deeper and in some cases more serious and surprising, especially when they come talk to you about sexual ideas that they heard outside the home. So it's really important that you not scare them off with your reaction. You might be personally horrified by some of the things that they were exposed to, but you don't want them to be afraid to tell you about it out of fear of upsetting you or having you launch into some kind of outrage. So stay calm, and a good trick I have learned is to ask them for their reaction, like, what did you think about it? And that sort of buys you time to recover your composure, and then you can sort of process what you think about it. The idea is you want to lead them into their inner life. And I've also found that boys in particular need to feel really respected. You really have to approach your kids, but boys especially, with this attitude that you respect them as adults even, and that we're all in this together trying to get to the truth. Also, don't worry if you don't have all the answers. Once they're teens, they may ask you something that is really difficult to figure out. And you really may need time to process the replies. So you can always say to them, wow, I am really glad you asked me that. And I don't know what the answer is. So can I just think about it and then we'll talk tomorrow? And that shows such humility on the part of the parent, but it also shows that you're kind of like co-investigators trying to figure this out together. And that, like anybody on the journey to learn, you're willing to consult people, read things, and that gives them a really good example for the pursuit of truth in general. The next pedagogical principle is to speak age appropriately to your kids. So this is kind of tricky, but as the parent, you have to kind of develop a sixth sense, a kind of special prudence to sense what is appropriate for their age. With really young kids, you have to learn to speak the truth simply, always. Don't tell them like fables about, storks or fables about something because you don't want to talk about the issue. You have to learn to speak the truth always, but in the dose that's appropriate for their age and their intelligence. And usually really young kids will clue you in. So let them ask the questions, let them take the lead in asking questions, and then you just answer exactly what they're asking you. And don't embellish much more. And if they're still not satisfied, let them ask until they're satisfied. But don't like launch into a whole theory about the thing. Just stick to what is appropriate for their age. At CanaVox, we've developed a kind of rule of thumb as a guide to sort of help us understand how much or what to expose different kids to at different ages. So our rule of thumb is from age 1 to 10, you want to really expose them to truth, goodness, and beauty about sexuality and marriage, and try not to expose them to confusing examples or bring evil into their imaginations. What you're trying to do is really like set up a very healthy baseline for what's normal in their mind. So whenever LGBT issues come up in the early years, as the parent, try to keep it simple and focus on the truth of what marriage is and what wonderful things friendships are. I'll give you some examples in a second. Then from age 10 to 15, you begin really to expose them to more of the lies and the misunderstandings out there, so you can face the realities while enforcing the ideals. So you really want to try to build the filter with them and help them work through reality. So when LGBT issues come up at this stage, you really want to get in there and talk about what's going on in the world while you're reminding them about marriage and sexual integrity. And I'll get into examples in a minute. And then finally, from the ages of like 15 to 18, you give them more freedom. Here you're continuing to coach them, but you're letting them take the lead more to try to do what's right on their own. So let them make the mistakes while they're still living with you and while you can still offer your opinions behind the scenes. So if you look at this, we really believe at CanaVox that the middle school years are a very key time to preparing them for more autonomy. After age 15, they really want more freedom and autonomy to think things through on their own. Now, I know from experience that a lot of parents balk at this, because they're going to prefer to protect their kids from the lies and do more of a sheltering while they're in middle school. But on the behalf of all the CanaVox leaders, I'd ask you to reconsider. We have this saying at CanaVox, better a year too early than 5 minutes too late. We believe that it's really important for parents to speak to their kids first, before the social environment speaks to them. Also, we've found that talking to a 10 or 11-year-old is much easier than talking to like a 15 or 16-year-old in the throes of puberty. When they're younger, kids tend to have more goodwill towards us and they trust their parents more, so they're more likely to listen and absorb what you're saying. In addition, they're not yet tempted by sexual things, so they're not going to feel personally judged or attacked when these matters are brought up. So the 10 to 15-year window is really a golden opportunity. Now, the downside of introducing topics earlier rather than later is that their intellectual maturity may not be quite ripe for some of these issues, or some of this may be hard to understand or go over the head. But we think that if you just plant the seeds of truth early, when they're open to the truth, those ideas are going to mature over time as their intellect catches up, and then they're going to remember what you said, and the truth will blossom in their hearts at the right time. If you wait to speak to them until they're really old, they may be more closed, or you may be talking to them after they've heard something at school from their peers, something that sort of recalibrates their sense of what is normal, and it's going to predispose them to lean towards the progressive liberal view of things. And now you have to correct false ideas as well as explain the truth. So my purpose here isn't to make you feel guilty if you've waited. It's never too late to start. But I'm really wanting to articulate the ideal here. The important thing really is to just practice having intimate conversations as soon as possible. Finally, the last principle is to practice a kind of moral balance in your conversations. When you're dealing with tricky moral issues, I suggest you try to think in terms of a balance. You have to message a combination of ideas that involve showing empathy and mercy towards those who don't understand the truth, but also communicate the truth and social justice, what we owe to others, especially in matters of sexuality. So many people are very good at the virtues of the left, and they're poor at the virtues of the right, or vice versa, right? Liberal progressives tend to put much more weight into the mercy and empathy side of the equation, and conservatives tend to put more weight on the justice and truth side of the equation. But as parents, I'd like you to try to hit all four areas so you have a really balanced answer. So in the following scenarios, I'm going to propose some conversation points. And there's really no cookie cutter recipe for what the right thing is to say, right? All of these scenarios are going to involve prudential decisions on the part of the parent. And as you know, reasonable people can disagree on what the right thing is to say on any particular case. So my goal is really to just get your moral imaginations going so you can think about what you might say when the time comes and apply the principles above. As my great mentor, Professor George, likes to say, this is more art than science. Okay, so let's start. The elementary years. So let's say you're driving home from art class and your 7-year-old daughter blurts out, Alex said she has 2 mommies. So Alex is your daughter's classmate, and you already noticed from drop-off and pickup that it looked like she had 2 same-sex parents, so you're not too surprised by the statement. So what can you say? You could say, okay, well, Alex lives with 2 women who are probably very nice. They both love her very much. They're both taking care of her and raising her the way 2 mothers might. But they're pretending they're married. Only a man and a woman can be married because only a man and a woman can make a baby together. Probably one of the women is the mommy who carried Alex in her tummy, and the dad lives somewhere else. Alex has a dad, but he's out there and he doesn't live with them. Do you understand? So that you can let them tell you if they understand. And then after the conversation, you can say, be really nice to Alex because she doesn't have a daddy at home. It's best not to talk to Alex about this because you don't want to hurt her feelings. So what have we messaged here? We've messaged that these women are very nice, that they're pretending to be married. It's not real marriage. Alex has a father, but he's not at home raising her. And she's not going to get to know him. And she may be very sad about this. And finally, this conversation stays here. So we have to teach our kids discretion. Now, I think this is enough information for a 7-year-old. And I like to use the word pretend with young kids because they really understand pretend play, and that pretend play is about acting and it's not about reality. If you don't like the word pretend, you could say, her parents think that they're really married, but they're not. Now, you might have a precocious child, or they might be in the 8-year-old range when they start to ask more why questions, and they might ask why the dad is not there. So I think we should be truthful and say something like, well, the two women did not want a daddy for Alex. They felt that her daddy was not necessary in her life, and that's really sad, right? Alex isn't going to have a lot of the things that a father usually gives his daughter. She's not going to get warm hugs from her dad. She's not going to get to ride on his shoulders when she does really well in her soccer game. One day she may wonder what her daddy looks like and if he's out there somewhere thinking about her, missing her or not. And then you have to help your child process that sadness and remind her to be really nice to Alex because she has suffered the loss of a parent. So at other times in your family life, I think it's really good to reinforce the positive aspects of real marriage and to verbalize how lucky we are to have a father in the home and a mother in the home. So for example, a mother could say to one of her kids at some point, "Didn't I pick a wonderful man to be your daddy?" Or a mom could say, she's trying to open a jar that's really stuck. She could say to her child, "Do you think daddy tightened the lid of this jar so hard so we would have to ask for his help and he could show off his muscles?" Or dad could say something like, let's ask your mom's opinion. She always sees something that I don't see." So what you're trying to do here is sort of drop messages that this moment was brought to you by the opposite sex parent in our home. We're living in times where our society is messaging all the time that genderless marriage is fine, mothers and fathers are interchangeable, so you can sort of resist that by messaging the opposite at home and really stating out loud how wonderful it is that they have a mom or a dad. Okay, next scenario. Becca says she's going to marry Felicity. So let me tell you the story behind this statement. I was having a play date for my 8-year-old daughter, and I was downstairs in the kitchen and an argument broke out upstairs. So I went upstairs and I opened my daughter's door, and as soon as I walked in, my daughter blurts out, "Becca says she wants to marry Felicity, but you can't do that, right, Mom?" And I was just looking down, and there were like 3 pairs of eyeballs just looking at me, And I thought, oh my gosh, 2 of the girls were not mine, and I had no idea what their families thought about gay marriage. So I just changed the subject, and I found an alternate activity, and I restored the play date piece. But then when I was driving the girls home, I thought I really need to tell the parents that this happened, So I dropped off the girls, and at the door I told one of the girls' fathers, they had a little bit of a gay marriage debate while they were at my house, and I didn't resolve it. So here's the baton. And he just looked at me like, okay, And the same with the mom. So I just sort of passed the buck there. But as I was driving with my daughter, I had a little talk with her. I said, "So what happened?" And she said, "Well, we were just playing, and Becca said the Felicity was her best friend, and they wanted to play house, and that they were just going to pretend they were married, and we got into an argument." So, so then I said to her, "Okay, so you're right. Only a man and a woman can get married. But here's the thing, Becca's family may have very different family values than we do, because a lot of people are confused about this issue. So we don't know why Becca thinks that, but her parents are going to talk to her about this. But then you try to guide your child into greater compassion so she can understand the underlying reason for her friend saying this. So why do you think Becca said she wants to marry Felicity?" And then she might say something like, "Well, they really are really good friends, and yeah, they maybe want to be friends always and forever, and she doesn't know how to express that properly. But what she's trying to say is that she's very good friends with Felicity." So I would take this opportunity to go deeper with your child about how beautiful and powerful same-sex friendships can be. And that's a wonderful thing. So you can talk about examples from books or movies they know about, right? Frog and Toad, or Fancy Nancy and her best friend Bree. And you talk about what good friendships these characters have and that they love each other very much, but these aren't marriages. These are strong friendships. So to recap, you explain to your child that Becca's a little confused, only a man and a woman can get married, but 2 girls can be great friends. And Becca's parents are going to talk to her about this, not us, because they may see things differently. And then you also sort of teach them to learn toleration. So again, you're aiming for this balanced approach with your kids. So a related topic of conversation that I suggest you talk deeply about is the subject of crushes. So crushes are fairly common in elementary school, and talking about crushes can be a great opportunity to teach them about what kind of friendship love is appropriate and what kind is just plain silly at their age. So I once asked my 6-year-old, what does it mean to have a crush on someone? And she said, well, basically it means somebody really, really likes you and they want to marry you. And I thought, okay, that's a pretty good working definition for a 5- and 6-year-old. But if you have an 8- or 9-year-old, you can go a little bit deeper into this phenomenon of crushes. One of our CanaVox state leaders, Margot, she's told us this story about her son, Joe, in the 3rd grade, who apparently was this chick magnet. All the girls were fawning over him. At lunch, they would bring him the apple juice, and during recess, they all wanted to play with him. And in class time, they wanted to be his partner. And Joe was just sort of taking this as well as he could, but at home, he was just complaining nonstop about all the girls. And his father said to him, well, Joe, you know what's going on here? These girls just have a crush on you. And he said, yeah, Dad, I'm feeling crushed. So his father said, look, don't worry about the girls. You can just focus on having good guy friends, okay? I'll talk to your teacher. And Joe just heaved this huge sigh of relief, So, talk to them about crushes. And Joe's father also explained to him, a crush is basically this exciting feeling you get when you really like someone very much. But unfortunately, it can also make you feel like you want to have that person all to yourself. It's kind of like you want to own that person. And that's not okay. If a kid in your class doesn't want to share a friend or they want to have them all to themselves, there's something wrong about the way they're acting. A good friend never wants to own you. And his dad further explained, these crushes are a little shadow of the future that's going to point you to your spouse. Someday you may find someone out there who's so special that you develop a crush on them. And that crush helps you to take a closer look at them and try to figure out if maybe that's the right person to marry. But at your age, you're too young to be thinking about marriage. I mean, you can't even drive a car yet. Right? So essentially, you want to help them have a more mature and well-informed perspective about what's going on in their classroom so they can observe it through this lens that you're giving them with new eyes. Okay, next scenario. Romans said that Thomas is gay. What is gay? So in some cases, your elementary school child may hear someone else call another person gay. They may hear it as an insult, or they may hear it as part of the progressive lingo. We know that sex ed programs all over the country are introducing the vocabulary of gayness to kids as young as 7 and 8. And we know that gay characters are making their way into children's TV and entertainment. So as the parent, the first thing is to figure out the context. Now, if it was used as an insult, you have to be very clear with your children that it's never acceptable under any circumstances to use that term as an insult. Full stop. However, it might have been said not as an insult, but as a simple statement of so-called fact. At CanaVox, we've been reviewing some of the new sex ed curricula in California, and they define gay for kids as young as 8 as a person who loves someone of the same gender, or a person who is attracted to somebody of the same gender. Now, I don't know about you, but there are a lot of people of the same sex that I love, but whom I would never want to be romantic or be sexually attracted to. So it's really important that we not fall into this modern mistake of telling our kids that gay simply means a person who loves someone of the same sex. It's deceitful. It's whitewashing the truth, and it's the progressive way of getting us all to believe we're all a little gay. So this is a difficult subject because when kids are this young, it's way too early to get into the subject of sexual attraction. It's not something they experience or that they can relate to. Plus, at this age, they should have many friends of the same sex. So if you talk about gayness as loving friends of the same sex, it may lead them to wonder if they're gay. So the definition that we suggest, if you really have to explain this term to young kids, is to say, a person who says they're gay, they'll have a crush, or they want to marry somebody of the same sex, but they're confused because you cannot really marry someone of the same sex, but you can always be great friends. Now, this is a major oversimplification of a very complex topic, but for such a young age, I think that's the right dose. You're getting them going in the right direction. The main takeaway your child needs is to hear that we mustn't insult people with the word gay, and that some people who say they're gay have a crush on somebody of the same sex. Okay, now let's tackle a scenario that gets at the transgender issue. Why does Graydon's mom paint his nails purple? So one of our state leaders told us a story about a time when she invited a woman over who was in a distressed marriage to come to her house to just console her, and she invited her to bring her kids along, and she brought her 10-year-old son, and he came over dressed in a slightly feminine outfit, and his nails were painted purple. And so her kids were playing with the kid, and after they left, she wasn't surprised when her son asked, "Why does Graydon's mom paint his nails purple?" So this is how our state leader tackled it. She said, "I'm so glad you brought that up. I noticed it too the moment they walked in. Graydon's mom thinks it's okay for him to dress more like a girl. Why do you think there's something off about that?" And so then she let him say what he was feeling. And then she affirms the truths that he already knows and then builds from there. Yeah, painting nails is something women do. And painting his nails could confuse Graydon about his biology because he's not a girl. But he could start to imagine he's a girl or begin to pretend play that he's a girl. Now, it's possible that this is the only time he's painted his nails and there's going to have no long-term effect on Graydon. But there's a risk that he could begin to enjoy the idea and want more and more to be something he can't be, which is a woman. So it's not a good idea for his mom to encourage it. And then after she messaged the truth to him, she followed up with the empathy and the mercy. "I'm so proud of you because you played with Graydon just as if everything were normal. It's really important that Graydon have really good friends because he's in a very difficult family situation right now. So I am so proud of you for pretending like everything was just normal. And let's pray that, that this young man does not become confused about his identity as a boy." Okay, so let's go to the middle school years now. "I can't stand the boys in my class. I hate school." Or "the girls in my class are just so mean. I prefer to just hang out with the guys." Now, these statements may not sound very controversial to you, but it allows us to explore the topic of gender identity and how our children develop a healthy sense of gender. It's important for our kids to bond with kids of the same sex. Now, I realize I'm talking to parents who mostly sent their kids to same-sex schools, but that is no guarantee that they're going to fully assimilate into their same-sex social environment. A child who is able to bond with kids of the same sex is subconsciously identifying with kids of the same sex. Subconsciously, he or she will affirm to him or herself, whether they realize it or not, "I fit in with the boys," or "I fit in with the girls." "I belong with the boys," or "I belong with the girls." Kids who have a hard time connecting with the same sex or who are distressed over gender roles of their sex, and especially for many years, they can begin to question their gender identity or question whether they are adequate as members of that sex. And that can lead to difficulties later on. Now, let me quickly follow up with a disclaimer. I'm not saying there's a direct causality. Just because your kid might have difficulties doesn't mean that they're going to have a gender identity disorder. There are lots of kids who had a really hard time connecting with peers of the same sex who never developed a disorder, and vice versa. There are some kids who had really great friendships with the same sex and who later develop gender identity disorders. So psychologists tell us that the causes of GIDs, the causes of gender identity disorders are really complex, and I do not mean to oversimplify them. But speaking as a parent, and speaking as somebody who's now read a lot of personal testimonies of people who've suffered GIDs, I think that a very important parenting skill today is to keep an eye on how well your child is assimilating and making friendships with the same sex. And if they're having a hard time, to work behind the scenes to boost their skill set or put them in an extracurricular activity or something so that they can feel comfortable and have one or two friends. And to do all of that without your child even being aware that you think there might be a difficulty, because you don't want to problematize it in their mind. So you really have to work with your spouse behind the scenes to boost their social capital, as it were. So you can make sure that the same-sex parent or a same-sex uncle or an aunt or some other mentor is available to bond with your child and give them same-sex inspiration and just tools. It may really take a concerted effort, but you might have to have lots of extra playmates and test out different friends and such, but it's really worthwhile. And on the flip side, maybe your child is one of the popular kids in the class. It's really important that parents explain to the kids who are popular that their strong social status means they also have a responsibility. They have a responsibility to make sure that other kids in the class feel included. Usually the popular kids have no clue that other kids may be having a problem because their life is great, So as the parent, you can really help develop their heart so that they have an eye for the vulnerable and they can learn to empathize and reach out to those kids. If your kid is one of the popular kids, they can make an enormous difference in a child's life. One of our mantras at CanaVox is that we have a sexual crisis because we have a friendship crisis. We are really deeply convinced that if we could succeed at teaching the art of friendship to children and adults of all ages, we would solve a lot of the gender puzzles that we're facing today. Okay, let's turn to the next scenario. Our neighbors, our lesbian neighbors, are such kind, fun-loving people, and nice moms too. I don't see what's wrong with being gay. So in this situation, I would suggest that you begin by agreeing with the kind things that your child is saying. They are wonderful neighbors, and they do seem like really nice moms. I love the way they interact with Willow on the playground. Here's the deal, though. Our children need to understand that same-sex parents have deliberately excluded a mother or a father from that child's life. So you could proceed this way. How do you think little Willow ended up in their household? Two women can't make a baby, right? So how do you think Willow got there? And then let them take a guess. And then after they take a guess, you fill in the blanks. So there's three possibilities. Willow could have been adopted. One of her mothers could have been artificially inseminated, or she was made with IVF. And then you explain what each of these three things is. So with adoption, some same-sex couples adopt, and you know that adoption is this heroic, beautiful act which aims to give a vulnerable child a second chance at being raised by a loving family. The absolute ideal is for the adopted child to have a mom and a dad. These children already suffered the loss of a biological parent once. And moms and dads are really important to kids. So while it's really kind and sacrificial for these two women to adopt, and they mean well, if we think about it from the perspective of the child, that child is suffering a loss a second time by being denied a mother or father. Don't you think these vulnerable kids deserve the best shot possible at experiencing the love of a mother and a father? And hopefully your child will understand. But Willow was not adopted. Do you remember when her mother, Tanya, was pregnant with her? So that means Willow was not adopted. She was made in one of the other ways. She could have been made through insemination, which is when a woman is injected in her vagina with male sperm. Do you know how they get the sperm? Well, a man who was either a friend and donated his seed, or a man who was not a friend, but an anonymous person, he took the sperm out of his body and he put it in some vials and he sold his sperm to a clinic. And then this same couple of women went to the clinic and they bought the sperm, and the doctor injected Willow's mother with that sperm. This man who was not her husband and who agreed to stay out of their family's life. Son, or your daughter, what's most heartbreaking is that Willow was created by adults who all agreed and cooperated to keep Willow away from her father. This man basically abandoned his child with the blessing of the mother and the doctor who injected the mother with the sperm. And then you can repeat, you know from personal experience how important daddies are for their children, and how sad Willow may be one day when she realizes that her moms took sperm from a man who agreed to stay out of her life. Willow will never know the feeling of being loved by her biological father. She'll never experience what it is to be hugged by her father and to tell her he's so proud of her for her achievements. He won't be there to console her when a boy is mean to her, or to show her that he wants to protect her, or to guide her and teach her about the ways of the world. It's one thing for a child to lose a dad to death and become an orphan by accident. It's a whole other thing for a child to lose a dad by design, because her own parents chose to create Willow with the express purpose of alienating her from her father. Now, if you have a sensitive child, that may be enough information. I once had to explain this to my 11-year-old Mariana, and as I was explaining this, tears started streaming down her face, and she was like, stop. Stop, Mom, stop, don't keep going. And she was so upset. She threw herself into my arms, and she started sobbing, and I just held her, and I felt really sad for her, but I also thought, this is the right response. This is absolutely the right response. We should be so heartbroken every time adults agree to create a family in this way, purposely denying a child a father. As adults, we are so accustomed to biomedical engineering techniques that we have lost sight of how inhumane this is for the child. And a child can see that more acutely. But I did sit down with my older child, who's a little more stoic, and I explained the third possible way that two women can reproduce using IVF. So the other possibility is that Willow was made in a clinic in a petri dish. And with this method, the man sends his sperm to the clinic, and the doctors take eggs out of Willow's mommy, and then the doctor joins the eggs and the seed in a petri dish to create little embryos. The doctor created little Willow and perhaps a few siblings more in that petri dish. Then, when Willow, the embryo, was big enough, the scientists put her into her mother's body, into Tanya's body, and then she had a regular pregnancy, and Willow developed until she was born. So with petri dish conception, just as with insemination, again, Willow's mother and her partner and the father agreed that the father would stay out of Willow's life. But there's another difficulty with IVF. And it's the fact that often the scientists make extra baby embryos on purpose, which they will not always want or need. So they make extras as backup to make sure that at least one embryo takes and develops well. And then once they have the embryos that the adults want, they either freeze or they destroy any other leftover embryos that are not needed. As you know, we are pro-life. We believe that all human life is precious, no matter the size, the race, the sex, whether the embryo has physical abnormalities or anything. A lot of IVF doctors don't see it that way, and they don't always explain that these embryos are destroyed in the clinic. So Willow may have lost several siblings in this procedure. Willow may have little brothers and sisters on ice, just waiting to be put into their mother's body, or used in research, or waiting to be thrown away. Again, these are terrible things to do to children. So what you're doing is you're teaching your child to look beyond the billboard. You're teaching your kid to look beyond the same-sex couple and ask, how did those children get there? What means were used to build this family? Were embryos killed or frozen behind the scenes to get these children? Was a father asked to stay out of the picture? Was a mother paid to keep away? Now, at this point, you have to pivot and teach your child to extend forgiveness and mercy towards a same-sex couple, because your child may be so upset at what they've done to their child that they may begin to loathe the same-sex couple for what they've done to Willow. One of our state leaders who lives right next door to a same-sex couple of women told us that when she explained to her son how his best friend next door was conceived, he was so angry that he said, "Why hasn't somebody called the police?" I mean, her son's natural instinct was to call 911 on behalf of his friend next door. So it's really important that as the parent, you pivot and you help your child extend mercy and forgiveness to the neighbors in spite of the terrible crimes being committed. Essentially, we need to teach them to forgive because they don't know what they're doing. So you can explain to them that lots and lots and lots of people in our world believe that this is totally okay. And those people are busy telling other people, like the neighbors, that they're making all the right decisions. They're really confused and they mean well. I mean, they have good intentions. They still think that marriage is what they're in, and they still think that marriage means children. And since they can't have a baby, they think they can just go to a clinic and make one. So, and then the doctors and their lawyers and even their religious leaders are telling them that they're all making the best decisions. So they're very confused. And if we call the police are not going to understand why we've called them. We live in a society that's very confused right now. It's like they speak another language, and we have to build this bridge with them and try to figure out how to communicate with them in words that they will understand. So the best thing for us to do right now is to be kind and forgive them and be patient, but keep trying to figure out how we speak that language so they'll reconsider what they've done and try to make up for some of the things they've done. So that's why we love our neighbors, but we can't turn a blind eye to the harm being done to Willow and pretend everything's rosy. So as you can see, as they get older, the topics get a little bit more challenging, but fasten your seatbelts because we're gonna enter the high school zone. Okay, John joined the Gay Pride Alliance and came out as gay. So once in high school, your child may hear about friends who've come out as gay. And so it may take several ongoing conversations to help them process what's happening in our world and help them absorb some key messages. I think the first step is to help your teen distinguish between same-sex attractions and gay identity, which are two different things. So some people experience same-sex attractions, and they need to describe their feelings accurately to themselves and to others like their parents or their close family or friends or a therapist or a religious leader. But other people take the next further step of adopting the gay identity, which is not a mere description of feeling, but a declaration. It's a declaration which is usually more public and which today is typically taken to mean a declaration of a lifestyle, that they're ready to take on public relationships and take on the lifestyle for themselves. So you can ask your teen to reflect on this distinction. What does John really mean when he says he's coming out as gay? People are gonna assume that he means he experiences same-sex attraction, but in today's culture, it usually also means that he's willing to adopt the lifestyle and have public relationships with other men. But let's slow down. What if all he really means is that he has feelings of attraction for other males? Maybe he's so astonished by that experience of strong attraction that he feels that the only honest conclusion is that he's gay because that's what his friends, the culture, entertainment is telling him. But what if there's another way to process what he's feeling? And now that you've planted that new possibility in your teen's mind, you can reflect with them about the gay script. So let's take this slowly. What is a social script? Social scripts are expectations that our culture has about how we're supposed to live and behave towards other people. So for example, for our grandparents or our great-grandparents, the social script was that you date, you fall in love, you get married, you have children. Today, the social script is you go out on dates, you hook up, you move in, and you might get married and you might have children, right? These are social scripts. And like an actor's script, our social scripts guide us on how we're supposed to behave. And we're so subconsciously picking up on these social scripts in our environment. So our kids are surrounded by a gay script. So what is the gay script? There's a psychologist who works in gender identity. His name is Dr. Mark Yarhouse, and this is how he describes the gay script, which I think is very helpful. Same-sex attractions are naturally occurring. So some people have opposite sex attractions, but some people have same-sex attractions or bisexual attractions. Some people are asexual. These attractions are naturally occurring or intended by God. These same-sex attractions tell you who you really are as a person. So there's this element of self-discovery. Same-sex attractions are at the core of who you are as a person. Same-sex behaviors that match your sexual identity are crucial for your self-fulfillment. So this step is about self-actualization. And finally, welcome to the club. You're gonna find lots of friends in the gay community. So you can see why the gay script is so very attractive to a teen, because they might be having some confusing feelings, and the gay script is telling them that these are natural and good and blessed by God, and all teens want good friendships. So this script is telling them that no one can blame them or judge them for expressing and behaving according to their core identity. The problem is that this script promotes a really flawed and narrow understanding of human identity. It promotes this view of the human person as grounded in their nature by their sexual feelings, which is not true. So we have to offer our teens an alternative script that helps them understand the truth of their identity. So Dr. Yarhouse is a Christian therapist, so he offers an alternative script based on a very biblical, evangelical understanding as identity, having an identity in Christ. But as a natural law theorist, I wanted to take a crack at developing an alternative script based on more of the natural law tradition. So here's a natural law script. So some people experience same-sex attractions. This doesn't mean the person is broken or bad. Individuals who experience same-sex attractions cannot really help how they feel about the people around them. Usually, they experience same-sex attractions without having done anything to cause or invite them. However, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. There's something slightly off. Our sexual feelings do not define us. Feelings of same-sexual attraction are a real part of the experience of some people. They're there, but they don't determine our identity. Our identity is grounded in human nature and is multi-dimensional. So let me explain this particular point slowly because it's a big concept. And I'm going to take a few slides and then we'll come back to the next point in the script. So you have to sort of explain to your teen the ABCs of their nature. The baseline core of our identity is our human nature. We don't do anything to merit or choose our nature. It's just a received aspect of our identity. That human nature is a spiritual and bodily unity. You are a body and soul together. You have certain spiritual capacities, like an intellect, free will, and emotions. You also have bodily systems and capacities. You have functions like a respiratory system, a circulatory system, a nervous system, a digestive system, and a reproductive system, which is either male or female. These bodily systems are an important part of who we are. We aren't just spiritual beings, but bodily beings too. And our nature is also a social nature. We're social animals, and we desire deep friendship with others. These aspects describe our core identity. And as I said, we don't do anything to choose or merit this. But it's wonderful to know ourselves and to accept it and to marvel at our human nature. Because if we rebel or we reject it, we'll experience alienation. But in addition to this core human nature, there are also aspects of our identity that we receive, which are more particular to the space and time into which we're born. So for example, you're born into a particular family with a particular ancestry. Maybe you're Irish or Italian or Kenyan or an American, like the girl in this picture. You're born into a particular time period. Maybe you were born in the 70s or in the 80s. Maybe you're a millennial. You're born into a particular faith tradition. Your parents may have raised you Christian or Jewish or Buddhist or Muslim. All of these aspects mark us. They inform our identity in really important ways, and we don't get to choose what family we're born into or in what era or what religion our parents brought us up in. These two are received characteristics. But we also react to all these things with our own free will, and we can further develop our own personal sense of identity. So for example, you might see that you're pretty talented in the sciences, and you choose to pursue medicine and decide to become a doctor, and you can say, I am a doctor. Or you realize that your faith tradition that your parents gave you isn't quite right for you, so you convert to another religion, and you can say, I am a Muslim woman. Or you choose to marry and have children, so you can say, I am Samira's mother, or I am Muhammad's wife. Or you might choose to stay happy and single and move in with a cousin or move in with a good friend. And these relationships also inform your identity. You may become interested in politics and align more with one particular party. So you can say, I'm a Democrat or I am a Republican. My point is that our identity is this beautiful mix of received and chosen qualities that blend into who we are. Our identity is not this fixed thing, and it's not this totally fluid thing, but it arises through this matrix of experiences that we choose and some of which we do not choose but just react to. These things give rise to our identity. So with this richer backdrop of how the natural law tradition understands personal identity, you can see why it's so narrow-minded to say that the feeling of sexual attraction is at the core of our identity. Although that experience of attraction is one of the features of life, it's not the core of our identity. So the gay script wants to put vulnerable kids into these tiny boxes that don't capture how amazing they are, and they don't offer them the full view of the life paths available to them. It sort of closes their horizons. And it's depersonalizing as well, because the gay script asks teens to treat their sexual feelings in a way we don't treat any other feelings. It tells teens that they must follow their sexual urges. But most people recognize that we have reason and free will to shape and respond to our natural urges in ways that are good, healthy, and beautiful for us. So, for example, we recognize that we have urges to overeat, and that doesn't make us bad or broken people, but we should recognize that something is off about that urge, and we should work towards eating in healthy ways. That's part of what it is to be human. So the gay script is treating people as if they're less than human. And of course, the gay script is part of this broader identity politics ideology out there, which takes one feature of our identity and makes it the core. So identity politics will say, if you're Black, that's your identity, these are the people, your people, and this is how you should think. And if you're Latina, these are your people, this is your identity, and you should vote for this person, right? So LGBT ideology is part of this umbrella of identity politics theories that are out there. So if we can help our teens see these false ideologies for what they are, as counterfeit scripts that try to stifle the richness of what the human person really is, I think it's gonna really give them the tools to push back. Okay, so let's go back to the natural law script. So the fourth step is that you can choose to integrate your sexual feelings into your human identity. You can direct your passions in accord with what is good and beautiful for you as a human being. So the idea is to acknowledge that those feelings of same-sex attraction are there, but not to give them more importance than they deserve. The individual chooses instead to center their identity on their free human nature, on their personal faith, their identity in Christ, for example, their identity in their family, in their professional pursuits, in their hobbies, in their social communities, and etc. Fifth, strong, intimate friendships are crucial for your self-fulfillment and happiness. So we're social animals, and we all need close family and friends to be happy. So here, I think with our teens, we can pinpoint examples of strong friendships from literature and movies. So Sam and Frodo from The Lord of the Rings, or Anne of Green Gables and her best friend Diana, or Jonathan and David from the Bible. You can reflect on these friendships with your teenagers and say, these friends cared so intensely for each other. They had this passionate love, and they were willing to sacrifice and in some cases die for the other person. And these were not sexual friendships. They were powerful friendships. So if you're a male, you should be attracted to beautiful examples of masculinity. And if you're a female, you should be attracted to beautiful examples of femininity. These attractions are part of what make us human. And finally, such an important message is that we have to tell them they are worthy of great love, that they have dignity by design, and nothing they do can shake that. No matter what feelings they feel, no matter how many mistakes they make, no matter how much they blow it, they need to understand that they have this human nature that makes them have a great dignity and that they are worthy of unconditional love. So it's really important that we give our teenagers these alternate scripts to compare with the gay script. So they can process how narrow the gay script is, and they can call their friends to greatness. And of course, the teenage years are the time when our young people are asking themselves these big picture questions about their identity. They're navigating all these decisions about who they are. Am I an athlete? Am I a prep? Am I a goth? Am I a skater? Who am I gonna hang out with? What am I gonna become? How am I gonna identify in the world? What's my purpose in life? So these conversations about their identity are gonna be very personally at stake for them. So, to go back to the original question, I think you're gonna have to have a lot of conversations with them about this, but if you had to just have a one-paragraph answer as an immediate sort of stopgap solution, here's one thing you could say to them. What if I told you that it's very natural for young males to desire to be masculine themselves, and that sometimes that desire becomes sexualized because males are very sexual beings? It's possible for those feelings to become misplaced as a young man tries to embrace his male identity. But his identity as a person is based on so much more than his sexual attractions. And our sexual feelings don't determine our actions. So giving him a gay label is not fair to his freedom. And if he does act on those feelings through homosexual behavior, he's gonna risk directing and cementing his sexual urges into habits. So it's important for him and for you to resist jumping to conclusions, to resist taking on the gay identity, and to give things time so that he can embrace his feelings of same-sex attraction and embrace the challenge of living and shaping his full identity for himself as a free man. So with words like these, you're gonna open your teenagers' horizons. And again, I think they'll have a powerful effect on their friends who are struggling with these feelings. Okay, good. But what's wrong with two guys kissing? Aren't they just showing their love for one another? So if your teenager is especially inquisitive, he or she may press you to explain what's so wrong about engaging in same-sex romantic behaviors. Your teen may already have seen plenty of same-sex kissing on the mouth on TV, or on the contrary, you may be raising your kids in such a wholesome environment where they haven't seen this kind of thing, but they're not clear about what exactly is wrong with it because they may be naive as to what kinds of sexual behaviors same-sex couples perform on one another. So their innocence may prevent them from fully understanding what is so bad about two guys holding hands or kissing on the lips. And you may have to disturb their innocence and explain same-sex behaviors to them. Now, obviously, this is a very prudential decision on the part of the parents, but I think we live in times when we have to do all we can to protect our kids from sexual misinformation. And I know a lot of parents hold back from being more transparent with their kids on such uncomfortable topics, partly because they want to model modesty in their speech, and they don't want to talk about some of these behaviors because they're just kind of condemned by so many cultures, right? So the thing is, we're dealing in a kind of emergency situation right now because there are so many forces trying to normalize these behaviors for our children. So I think we live in a time when we have to break some of the past rules of modesty in our speech so that we can have a clear communication to children. So the idea is sort of to inoculate them, to give them a vaccine. You're going to give them a small dose of the evil so that they're protected from the greater evil out there. So, first I would remind them that our sexual passions can be very strong and tricky to control, especially in youth. So when you begin to kiss someone or hold them physically, we can stoke sexual desire for that person. And as you know, sexual desire is like fire, great when properly directed, but hazardous when it isn't. When two people arouse each other, they're going to begin to desire sexual union. However, when it's two men or two women, they can't achieve the sexual union that their bodies are desiring. So they perform acts on each other that try to imitate sexual union as closely as possible. Unfortunately, this can lead to some major abuses of the body. I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, Jenny, but I think it's really important you know. Because men don't have vaginas, they try to substitute for the vagina by using a man's rectum. They will have rectal intercourse. The rectum, as you know, is part of the digestive system. It's not part of the reproductive system. The job of the rectum is to eliminate waste from the body. It's an exit. It is not an entrance. So when a person uses their rectum as if it were part of the reproductive system, he's misusing his body. And this behavior can cause severe damage to that man. He can pass bacteria that can be very risky for their health. And many terrible diseases are spread by that kind of behavior. And because two women don't have male genitals, they'll sometimes use artificial objects in their sexual acts. Two women can touch and arouse each other in sexual ways, but they cannot unite sexually because only a man and a woman can do that. Do you understand? So when same-sex couples of either sex misuse their organs in these ways, they're going against the natural design of their bodies. It's kind of like a person who sniffs glue and abuses their lungs, which are made to breathe clean air and get oxygen. We would never celebrate a glue sniffer and say that it's just another way to get air and thrive, right? We recognize that we mustn't misuse our bodies. But these can also become psychological and emotional problems because when we misuse our bodies in such severe ways, we're actually alienating ourselves from our bodies. We're treating ourselves as if we were objects rather than persons or as subjects with dignity. So let's backtrack. If a young man has a crush on another guy, and if he decides to act on his sexual attraction by wanting to hold him or cuddle with him or kiss him, in the long run, he's going to get into the habit of arousing himself with another guy, and that can result in these tremendous abuses of his body. So it's better for that young man to learn to manage his crushes early on so that they don't lead to more damaging behaviors down the line. And if a girl has a crush on another girl and she decides to act on her sexual attractions by trying to hold or cuddle or kiss another girl, in the long run, it's going to result in the abuse of her body as well. So again, it's better for a girl who has a crush to learn to manage her love for other girls and let them become strong friendships and not sexualized relationships. Now, usually if you have this conversation with your teen, they're probably going to be really sober and shocked and stunned. I only had to explain this once so far to my kids, to my eldest daughter, and she was just so shocked that these behaviors were even considered appropriate and even promoted in lifestyle magazines and in sex ed programs around the country, that she just was speechless, you know? So at that point, I thought it was good to channel her shock to a better place so that you could end on a positive note. So I said something like this. You see, Lucia, our job, your job, is to help bring light, truth, and peace to this broken world. You have to be like an undercover agent working for the truth. We live in a world that is very confused and where evil actions are said to be good and good actions are said to be evil, and we all have to resist with great creativity and conviction and kindness and mercy and courage and boldness. You have to become like a Navy SEAL for the truth. And usually this brings a big smile to their faces, and it fires them up with a sense of mission and purpose. But that Netflix series is really interesting and fun to watch. Why can't I watch it? The homosexual subplot isn't even that important to the storyline. And your kid may even add, I know what the truth is, and just watching this show isn't going to confuse me. So I could see myself answering my kids in one of two ways, depending upon my teenager's personality and maturity. So if your kid really should know better, because you've already talked about these issues so many times and you're kind of surprised that it hasn't sunk in yet, you might pursue option A, which is the direct and to the point approach. I'd say something along the following lines. Okay, let's think about this. What if that Netflix TV show had a racist subplot instead? What if it were a really great TV show that everyone was watching and the racism was just mild? Would we want to endorse that TV show? Would we want to let the ratings for that TV show go up? Would we want to watch racism even in tiny amounts and allow it to become normalized in our minds? No, right? No. We always want to be shocked when we see racism, and watching it even in small amounts can erode our sense of that shock. Racism involves treating of a different race as subhuman. LGBT ideology involves treating children and sexual minorities as if they were subhuman. LGBT ideology, like racism, is a major violation of human dignity. So we don't want to say or do anything that would condone or promote that false ideology. The directors of those TV shows probably don't realize that they're treating some members of our society as subhuman. They're usually ignorant of the wrong that they do, but we know better. And of course, we must not promote their propaganda. However, if your child just doesn't know better, or you haven't been able to talk to them enough about this, or you think it just might work better to pursue a more patient, careful path, you might pursue option B, the slow and patient approach, and sit down and watch the TV show with them. So there's some TV shows which are not too over the top, and which may present an opportunity for you to calmly model for your kid how to have a critical attitude while watching these shows. Now, you're gonna have to be very careful that your response to some of the ideology isn't too heated, right? As the parent, you're gonna have to stay really calm and open to the teenager's interpretation and just really analytic about the material. But the goal is to teach them to be good detectives and to figure out how the plot is promoting false understanding. You could say, why do you think they're always presenting the gay character as happy-go-lucky all the time? Do you think that's realistic, right? Ask some questions as they're watching. They're probably not gonna want you to pause it, but that's the deal, right? So some of our teenagers have that kind of personality, which they wanna be treated like adults, and they appreciate it when you walk them through it. So you might decide that this is the best tactic to watch the film together. And then after you watch it, you can say, now don't you think those 2 hours could have been much better spent if we watched X other TV show instead? Okay, my last scenario for the night. My classmate Jane says she's a boy now. Should I use the transgender pronouns? So as we try hard to show respect for our trans friends, our colleagues, and our family members, the question immediately arises, can we use transgender pronouns? The answer is no. Otherwise, we become complicit in a lie, and we can begin to confuse ourselves too about the truth and the reality of the matter. I've had people tell me that they began to adopt the transgender pronoun and they actually became confused. They got so accustomed to thinking of the person as if they were of the opposite sex. So we have to stand firm in the truth and speak truth always. I know this is hard, but we have to teach our children to do the hard, right thing. We push our kids to excel in every other area, in math, in music, in athletics. We can push them to excel in the proper forms of speech in these delicate scenarios. So tell your children that they should be always very kind to their friend, and always interact with respect and compassion and kindness, especially if that girl thinks she's a boy, because that child is hurting. Who knows what they've suffered or they're currently suffering, such that they want to reject their body. Your child can exert himself to use the desired name that the person wants to be referred to as, but not the pronoun. So, yes, Ash went to the bathroom, or the teacher's going to the music room with Ash, or that backpack is Ash's. And also, don't discount the possibility of dialogue between your child and the trans teen. If there's a history of goodwill and kindness between them, your son or daughter may be able to address the awkwardness of the pronoun issue and say, Ash, don't kill me if I messed you up on your pronoun, okay? We have a CanaVox state leader who lives right next door to this, the one I mentioned earlier, who lives next door to the same-sex couple, and one of the women began to take hormones to start growing a beard and to appear more male. And eventually this woman came over and told them her new name and that she preferred male pronouns now. And our state leader listened politely, but in due course, at the right time, in the right moment, she said, I'm so sorry, I have a really hard time using the pronoun you prefer. Would you mind if I just used your chosen name instead? And the neighbor was completely fine with it. In fact, they had kind of like a funny conversation about it. We so often assume that if we disagree or we voice our disagreement, things are just gonna go south, or that we won't succeed if we just act normally. But polite face-to-face communication can really go a long way. This is really delicate business, but the challenge is to look into the person's confusion, stand firm in the knowledge of the truth, and then love them where they are. So let me conclude. Mothers and fathers, you are national treasures. You are national treasures. You are more important than the White House. You are more important than the Supreme Court. You are more important than all the parks in this beautiful country. You are national treasures because you are raising the next generation of citizens to have big hearts, to carry our country forward in the truth of what marriage is and what healthy sexuality looks like. And you're national treasures because you're out there ministering to so many people who've been broken by our sex culture and who are confused. You aren't bigots. We're all bombarded with the message that people who think like us are haters and bigots. But don't be frazzled. We are legion. There are many people who think like us. And if we stay strong and kind and polite in the truth, little by little, we will start to convince people that we really do love others, including our LGBT friends, and we will their good and all that is true, good, and beautiful for them too. And finally, take the long view. Be patient. Don't be frustrated by how long it's going to take to convince our fellow countrymen and women about these truths. We have to understand that we're the first generation of parents having to raise children in the era of legalized gay marriage. No other generation has had to raise kids in the midst of this transgender revolution. So we have to extend a little mercy and patience on ourselves too, as we sort of fumble our way through this, because there's no playbook for this. Our parents didn't have to deal with it. I like to think of it as a football game. You know, we just have to get the ball 10 or 15 yards down the field, and our children and our great-grandchildren are gonna take the ball another 10, 15 yards down the field. We're probably not gonna see the touchdowns in our lifetime, but our children are gonna watch and learn from what we do. They're gonna improve on how we did it, and over the generations, this thing is gonna really carry forward. So our job is just to get the ball rolling in the right direction. So onward, and thank you.
Can I ask the first question? Yeah. So I was trying to invite a bunch of neighbors that I actually thought I was met with, so I tried to invite some other people in my neighborhood that I thought like I did, that my husband and I did. And they came at it very, very poignantly, like, no, we believe that you should love everybody, and we're teaching our kids that they can marry whoever they want to marry as long as they're in love. And I didn't know what to say. I mean, these are neighbors across the street from me. What do we say to people that have that kind of reaction?
Yeah.
Because I believe in loving everybody. That wasn't my point, but I really didn't know how to respond to them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What triggered it? I missed the first part.
I was inviting them to this talk.
Oh, you invited them to
Yes.
this talk.
Not one, but two, three different families.
Oh,
and
my
all of
gosh.
them had the same response.
Yeah.
We teach our kids to love everybody.
Well, good for you for even inviting them. I mean, that's awesome. That's an act of bravery even to begin with today, right? I wouldn't enter into a debate with people who are that aggressive. I think especially, I don't know if it was you said it was in person. I don't know if it was over email. It was in person. I'd say, okay, well, we think differently. You know, I'm sorry that it's not your thing. We think differently. I would just keep it like that. But I do want to say how much value there is. How much value there is in you're just saying you're going to attend a talk like this. Because very often we just don't even want to show our cards. So what you've done, after they cool off, okay, after they cool off and you showed that you were polite and okay, I think differently. I thought you were coming from a different place. Sorry, I would keep it very civil. But now they're going to be watching you really carefully, So hopefully over time, it might take a few years, but they're going to see actually what a cool neighbor you are and how kind of fun and nice you are to your kids and that you're really nice to all the people. And they might even observe you interacting with somebody they know who is gay, etc. People begin to connect the dots, okay? So I would just say that it's really important not to enter into debates, with people. We have to just stop the debating and just remain civil and agree to disagree. I know that sounds very, 1990s, but for now, I think it's very progressive for us to keep it there. Thanks for your question.
Hi. How would you recommend we approach a situation where there are close family members who have same-sex attraction and just approaching that with our kids?
Yeah. So it depends on so many particulars. So I don't know how old your kids are, but young, middle, okay, so it depends on so many particulars. And we actually have some videos that I wanted to, actually, Neil wanted me to put this up. We'll come back to this, but we have some Dear Katie videos. Dear Katie is our video blog, and we tackle some of these questions on our blog. So the most important thing, I think, with family members is to show them a great deal of love, not to tacitly consent to or endorse any particular action. So for example, if you're invited to a gay wedding, I would not recommend that you go. If you're invited to a housewarming party of theirs, I don't think I would go. But it depends on the situation. But I think you want to establish friendly ties with them, but also show them that, especially as far as you're exposing your kids, you have some limits and you're trying to raise your kids in a particular value system. But you're not trying necessarily, it just depends, right? Usually they don't want to enter into a debate. So it's more about just saying, this is how we live, and we're willing to have you guys over for dinner or for Thanksgiving, and we're willing to interact in these scenarios, but you have to be very careful with the ages of your kids. It really depends a lot on the particulars. If they're very young, okay, one of the things we talk about at CanaVox, with very, very young kids, like I said, truth, goodness, and beauty, you sometimes just don't want to confuse them about their aunt and her partner. With very young kids, it's very difficult for them to process. So I would err on the side of you meeting privately with your family member and their partner, go out for a beer with them or go out to dinner with them, but be more discriminating about how your children interact with them. But if they're 10 and up, then they can, I think, start interacting with you, talking with them and coaching them on how to process things. Is that helpful? If you want, you can come back to me, but it's basically very delicate and you have to decide case by case, and you're just gonna learn by doing. Go ahead.
I'd like to just, first of all, thank you for giving parents hope and encouragement for confronting this issue, whether it's either within or outside the family or just in the culture overall. So So thank you very much for that,
Yeah,
Doctor.
welcome.
I'd like to ask your perspective for parents that are dealing with varying beliefs among their own children, especially for many who might have large families. We confront this within our own home and our young children in the home, and where there comes such a point in time where you can only tolerate so much of a same-sex attraction or gender identity disorder example in the home. I'm just curious your perspective on how to, maybe advise or encourage parents how to manage through that.
That is a tough one. So you're basically saying older children modeling confused example to the younger children. Oh man, you've thrown me a real curve. I mean, I think it would depend so much on specifics. I think it would be a matter of having a lot of conversations about when you're living under our roof, these are going to be the terms of engagement, you know? I understand that you identify as different gender, you're still working with them on accepting who they are, but we ask you, for the sake of your sister, your little sister, to please refrain from speaking in certain ways in front of her. And if she asks you certain questions, to please take the fifth and not address those issues with her. I think you really have to teach your children, your older children, toleration, really, that they have to tolerate different worldviews in their home. And you're gonna extend a certain degree of toleration and patience with them, but they also have to tolerate, I mean, I think you're gonna have to, and I hope, I pray and hope that that kind of thing will work. That is really tough. Thank you for asking that. Yes?
How do you think Catholic or Christian grade schools should deal with the issue of educating children that come from same-sex couple households?
Yeah. The way that schools have dealt with it in our area, my colleague April has her children in a classical Christian school, non-Catholic, but classical Christian. They have like a kind of statement of their values, their school values, and they say that they believe marriage is between a man and a woman, and they have certain views about sexuality that they outline in their school creed, and they have all the parents sign off on it. So they and I know several other schools around the country do something similar. They'll say, we welcome everybody, you can definitely send your child here, but these are the family values we teach here, and we ask you to respect that. And most of the cases I've heard have been successful, that the same-sex couples will respect that and they will not make a stink. I mean, there's a lot of coexistence that's starting to happen. Surprising, you don't hear about it, right? But it can happen.
Yes, my question is, I think the terms we use are very important.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question on terms. I think in society, we see a lot of confusion with these basic terms of sex, gender, transgender. Would you give me your definition of those terms?
Yes. So our sex regards our biological makeup, whether we are male or female, XX or XY chromosomes, and every cell in our body is either male or female. There are some intersex cases, some anomalous cases, are a minority, but every one of us has a sex. Gender is a very precise psychological term, and it's also a very precise term used in sociology. I don't recommend that we use gender like every day as a stand-in for sex, because it's not just synonymous with sex. Gender in psychology is about our consciousness of our sex, like the self-understanding we have about our sex. So for people like me, okay, people who are more traditional-minded, your sex and your gender should always go together. Your gender should always be male or female in accord with your biological makeup. In sociology, gender also has an application. So in psychology, when we talk about gender dysphoria, when psychologists talk about gender dysphoria, there's a mistaken understanding of gender. They believe that they identify as a sex that they're not. So psychologists use this term as a precise technical term that is helpful for them. okay? In sociology, sociologists also use the term to describe things like gender roles. So gender roles are distinct from sexual roles. Why am I getting into all of this? Because some people have pressed me and say, why do you even use the word gender? Like, do we even need the word gender? Aren't we just sort of going into the liberal agenda by using that term? And I kind of agree with that sentiment, except for there are precise uses. Some theologians, for example, say that God has a male gender, even though he doesn't have a sex, right? Or some linguists will say, well, in Spanish and in some languages, nouns have genders even though they don't have a biological sex. So in certain specific fields, the term gender makes sense. But for our everyday language, I would lobby for us to just use the word sex. Same-sex dorms, what's the sex of the baby? I don't think we need to use the word gender as synonymous with sex, because I think it does contribute to some confusion, all right? Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes, go ahead, and we'll go next.
Hi. There's just a lot of fear surrounding this issue and engaging it in a public way, even within families. Fear of being labeled a hater or a bigot or many other names. So within an extended family situation recently, something came up and someone mentioned, you can't say that. And it was something that was true. How do you combat that word hater? And
Yeah.
just some advice on that.
Yeah. Well, if it's happening like at the dinner table at Thanksgiving with your family, for example, I say, well, I hope we can talk about that, because I don't think I'm coming from a place of hate. I think I'm coming from a place of love, and maybe we can talk about it sometime. I would leave it at that. I wouldn't go into a big, diatribe with your family member at dinner. I think politeness goes a really long way, but then personal talky talks with that person as much as possible, okay? Yeah, and not give up, and really take the long view. I have a family member who's like, she thinks exactly the opposite of everything that I do. And we've been friends now for like 20-something years, and now that after 20-something years, she's starting to see, not be convinced, but starting to understand my point of view. And it's been a great lesson in patience for me, because sometimes it takes 20+ years to get through to the person that you are not a hater, And it takes lots of trips to the beach and lots of birthday parties and lots of little cards in the mail. It's like putting down payments of love all the time. Your down payments, and you fill the love tank, so that when you have to make a withdrawal by talking about some difficult topic, you've already have this love tank filled with down payments, But if you try to get into these delicate conversations, you're making all these withdrawals, but you don't have a wholesome, friendly relationship. You haven't been making down payments of love, and it's really impossible to get into any of those subjects. So just focus on lots of down payments of love. One more. Yeah.
Hi, I appreciate especially the comment that you made about sort of still having a need for the term gender in society. And I'll just share something that I get a little stumped over sometimes. So I operate early childhood programs, and oftentimes, a lot of developmentally appropriate practice and best practice involves exposing kids to non-gender stereotypical roles, like understanding that we are empowering young women or little girls to pursue professions that may not typically be identified with women historically, for example. But we also have a very multinational population within our centers. And I think something that parents get very hung up on is, particularly in dramatic play in the very young years, some people are very, very concerned about whether their little boys are playing with some of the dresses that are in the dress-up area, or putting on costumes that, maybe it's a female superhero versus a male one. And we have some parents who are, really distressed over this and expect us to prohibit the children and interfere with their play and remove those items from them. I'm talking, up to 5-year-olds.
Yeah.
And then we have other parents who are the polar opposite, and we've actually had some kind of verbal disagreements among parents within the center. And I just kind of wonder what your perspective is on that, both from up to what point or what age is that not a concern for kids to be engaging in kind of mixed gender, or not mixed gender, but kind of, I don't want to say transgender, but you know what I mean. And also, what would be maybe a professional and respectful response that we could give to parents who are coming from very diverse perspectives?
I'm not a psychologist, I'm a philosopher, okay? And you're asking a question from psychology, but I've read some really great psychologists on this. So I would say a couple of things. First, I think a lot of times just let the kids play and don't have the adults just let the kids sort of play, I think what happens is that sometimes you get these very progressive instructors who want to influence and make them play things that are unnatural to the child, and that I think is a red flag. So if instructors are just having costumes out and trains, and the girls are going to the trains and the boys are in costumes and they're putting on a dress for a moment, I don't think we should be alarmed by things like that. Now, psychologists will say that if there's a little boy who's having persistent discomfort with the gender play that the boys typically engage in, discomfort, okay? Like is feeling anxiety over playing baseball with other boys, or is feeling anxiety, things like that. What he recommends, this is again, Mark Yarhouse. Mark Yarhouse, this one. Who I don't endorse 100%, by the way, but he has a lot of good things. He says to ignore the behavior that is less than desirable, okay? Just ignore it. Really try to promote the good behavior and cheer the child on, and really try to just distract them and substitute for positive things. So I think that's a really good strategy in general in life. Like sometimes we just have to ignore what we don't like so much and just really try to redirect their attention and using different techniques to try to make them comfortable with play of the same gender. And then as far as dealing with parents, oh my gosh, I have no idea. I mean,
well, thank you for your honesty.
All right, I think that's a wrap, right? I think Dr. Fagan likes us to finish. So thank you so much. It's been wonderful.